Hi. Over the years I've been at camp, I've told many, many stories, probably 40 or 50 different stories. But my all-time favorite story you're about to hear now involves a young man named Paul Dactyl. Now, years ago, starting in 1970, in the town of Parsonsfield, in a remote corner of the town, I don't think anybody's been there was a big house. And originally it was a sanatorium for returning World War I veterans who suffered from tuberculosis. The house closed down, fell into disrepair, and in 1970 a group called Elan, E-L-A-N, opened up that house as a halfway house for troubled youth. Now, Elan itself was a troubled agency. It began in Poland Springs, Maine, and operated 2 or 3 houses in the state of Maine for children that were hard to handle. They had trouble with the police or trouble with the family, and they're put in these institutions. They're not pleasant institutions, and Elan had a bad reputation. I came back from the Army in 1970 and started working again at the camp, and I became aware of this house. And in 1973, I became the executive director of the camp, and I was approached by somebody at the house to hire one of their people, a young man named Paul Dactyl. Paul Dactyl had suffered some anguish at home. His family had committed him to Elan for a period of time. He was not a bad kid, but he was a troubled kid. And if he kept busy, he was a good kid. And these people at Elan asked if I would take him to work in the kitchen at the camp. I agreed to it. So every day, Paul Dactyl would come down to camp with his bicycle. It's about a 5-mile ride, and he'd work in the kitchen. He was a good worker. He was a good kid. He kept to himself, quiet kid, moody, but didn't cause any problems, and went home. Now, Paul Dactyl had a cat at home at Elan, and the cat had an extra clause called double-pawed cat. And double-pawed cats are rare animals, but it was a good cat. He loved Paul very much, and Paul loved the cat very much. The day after work, Paul rode home on his bicycle. It was a rainy sort of day, and he was in a bad mood. He came home, and he found his cat severely hurt and injured by the people who lived in the building with him. And he took the cat and he held it, and the cat eventually died. And he was really upset, he was really enraged, and he really didn't sleep well that night. The next morning he came to camp to work, and he was really in a rotten mood. And the cook said something to him like, "Are you feeling all right, or why don't you pick up your feet and work a little bit faster?" And Paul was so angry that he took a knife and he was going to stab the cook. I happened to walk by the kitchen at the time. I saw Paul with a knife looking at the cook. I said to Paul, "Get out of here. Go away. You're fired. Get out of here." And Paul put down the knife, got on his bicycle, and he rode home. I found out later why he was so upset, and I realized that he had problems that maybe we could help him solve, and I decided to go up to the Elan house that night to talk to Paul. As I drove into the parking lot of this house, a big house in the middle of nowhere, it's a parking lot. Drove up into the parking lot, and I looked up, and there was one window lit in the building. As I looked up, I saw, with the window shade drawn down, a shadow across the window shade. Really kind of spooky. I went to the house and I rapped at the door. Finally, I heard some footsteps coming from a distance, and the door opened. A woman answered the door, and I said, "My name's Bill Margolin. I'm the director of the camp where Paul Dactyl worked, and I'd like to talk to him." "He's not here." "But he was here this morning. I fired him, and I want to talk to him about it." "He's not here." And she slammed the door in my face. And I walked away and I went back to camp. And I wondered ever since what happened to Paul Dactyl. In 1912 and 1913, the Elan house closed down. And somebody bought it and they were going to renovate it into some sort of bed and breakfast. And I found out from somebody who was working there that they thought that Paul Dactyl was back. So I told the story to the camp about Paul Dactyl. And that time at camp, we had a counselor named Thibault. He was from France, I believe, and his parents were visiting the camp. I told the story to the camp, including Thibault's parents, and I wanted to bring people up to see if Paul Dactyl was really in the house. I wasn't going to go there alone. So we drew lots, and Thibault's parents drew the lots to find out who could go. About 3 or 4 cars that went. I took the van, and there were some cars that went. Mark Sands was the waterfront director. He went with me. Ben Eggert was there as a counselor. He came with a camera. And I don't know who else went, but perhaps some people who are listening to the story now went with me. So we all took the caravan. We drove up to this place, middle of nowhere, about 5 or 6 miles from camp. And we pulled into the parking lot about 9 o'clock at night. And as I look up in the window, there's one window lit, and there's a shade. And I see a shadow crossing across the shade, like it happened 30 years before that. And chills went through my body. And we went up to the front door, and we knocked on the front door. Knocked again, and from a distance I heard shuffling of feet coming to the door. The door opened. The man opened the door. I said, "My name's Bill Margolin. I'm from West End House Camp. I want to see if Paul Dactyl is here." And he said, well, he gave me his name. I forgot his name, but he gave me his name. He told me he was a night watchman. He was hired by the company that was renovating the house. It was his first night on duty. There were strange noises coming from the third floor. He was afraid to go up there. He said, "You're welcome to go up there if you want." So I gathered my courage, and I went. I had Mark Sands to protect me, and Ben Egger and all the other campers and counselors. We started walking up the steps to this house. It was really in disrepair. I remember there were big drawings on the walls from Limerick, Maine, and some books lying around, and some papers lying around as if the people left in a hurry. And we walk up to the third floor, and there's a long corridor with rooms off each side of the corridor. As I stood at the end of the hallway, down the end of the hallway, there was one light on in a room. The door opened. I heard moaning. And as we walked down the corridor, the moaning became louder. And we turned the corner and we go into the room. And there, lying on the bed, was Paul Dactyl. He was dirty. He didn't look like he aged at all. And he was moaning. And I went up to him, and the kids were all around me. I was glad I had protection. And I said, Paul Dactyl. He looked up at me. He said, "Bill." I said, "Paul, it's Bill from the camp." He said, "Bill, they killed my cat." I said, "I know, Paul, that was 20, 30 years ago. Where have you been? How have you lived?" All he could say is, "They killed my cat." And he's moaning, and he's dirty, and he's hungry. So I helped him up, helped him get up, and he walked with me out the building. I don't know where the night watchman disappeared to. We walked out the front door, walked into the van, and I took him back to camp. And the kids all saw him, and Ben Egger took some pictures. I don't know where those pictures are now. I'd like to find them. I brought him back to camp. I brought him into the kitchen. He had a little bit to eat. I brought him to some of the cabins where the people had listened to the story but had not had a chance to go on the trip. And just introduced him to Paul Dactyl. Didn't talk much. He was sort of non-committal. I kept saying to him, "Paul, how have you lived these past years? Where have you been?" He couldn't answer. I never found out the answer to that. So eventually I took him and I called the state of Maine, and they agreed to accept him as a ward of the state. I took him to the good old hospital in Sanford. I met a social worker there, and I dropped him off. That was the last I ever saw or heard from Paul Dactyl. I don't know if he's still alive. I don't know whatever happened. I've not been to that house again. But that's the story of Paul Dactyl and his cat with the extra paws, and the trauma that he endured, and the story that I told. It was the best story I've ever told. It was my favorite story, and I still don't know what happened to him.